Chrissy, thank you very much for that glowing introduction. So I'm here to talk about yet another resurgence in the Perth Basin. As you'll see going on in this conference, disclaimers are an obligatory part of every talk. This is mine. So I'd like to start the conference with a quote from Professor Park Dickey back in 1958. And I'll read this out. It starts as, "We usually find oil in a new place with old ideas. Sometimes we find oil in an old place with a new idea, but we seldom find much oil in an old place with an old idea. Several times in the past, we thought we'd been running out of oil when actually we were running out of ideas." And I think this quote encapsulates the Perth Basin. And there we go. So the northern Perth Basin covers the region between roughly Lancelin and Geraldton and includes the onshore areas and the offshore areas. Gas was first discovered in the Yardarino well by Woppert in 1964, and until recently the largest discovery has been the Dongra gas field with about half a TCF of gas. Then in 2014, the deepening of the Senecio 3 well beyond the primary target discovered the 600 BCF plus Waitsia gas field. And this discovery has been the catalyst for a number of recent discoveries that are targeting deep gas objectives. And it's interesting, in this Good Oil conference this year, about a third of the companies that are presenting have some interest in the Perth Basin. So, since the discovery of Yardarino and Dongra gas fields, there have been another 3 phases of exploration in the northern Perth Basin. The second phase included the discovery of Wadata, Bahara Springs and Mount Horner, and the third phase, which started in the year 2000, with gas discovery in Bahara Springs North, and also, more importantly, oil in Cliff Head and Hovia. The fourth and most recent phase started in 2014 with the discovery of Waitsia and has then been followed up recently by the gas discoveries at Bahara Springs Deep and also West Erregulla. I'm just going to step to one side for a brief moment and talk about creaming curves, because I'll be showing a few of these as we go through in the presentation. Now, creaming curves plot the cumulative volume of hydrocarbons discovered in an area against the amount of time or well count. And if we have a look on this plot, here's on the vertical axis the cumulative volume, and on the horizontal axis the well order. Now, these curves indicate how mature a basin or a play is, which is a way of estimating how much more oil and gas may be left to be discovered in the basin based on past results. And you can see on this graph here the early period within this idealised creaming curve. Lots of discoveries over a very short period of time in the frontier and emerging phases. Then as we get into the maturing and very mature phases, a lot more time or wells have passed, but it's only small incremental discoveries. Now, these creaming curves are just one of many tools that are in the toolbox of a geoscientist, and it can be used when assessing the hydrocarbon potential of a basin, and they're usually a very blunt instrument. But when used carefully, they can actually provide some really good insight into what has happened in the past and what may happen in the future. So this is the creaming curve for the northern Perth Basin. We can divide this into 4 phases, which is the Dongra Yardarino phase, the Bahara Springs Wadata phase, the Cliff Head Hovia phase, and then our most recent phase, the Waitsia West Erregulla Bahara Springs Deep phase. So phase 1 went from 1963 through to 1979, and I characterise that as the low-hanging fruit. Right? This phase targeted the late Permian Dongra sandstone play. That's a set of sands below a large shale seal that's about 255 million years old. And it was targeting features in very large structures, anticlines, big tilted fault blocks, easily visible structures. And that's because back at that stage, Woppert generally only had very low resolution, 2-dimensional seismic data and gravity and aeromagnetic data. And this was, in terms of the Park Dickey quote, it was hydrocarbons being found in a new play in a new place. The second phase I call stepping out, and no apologies to Joe Jackson for stealing the title of one of his songs, was the Wodgina Formation play. And this is a slightly older play that's sitting immediately underneath the Dongra play. It's around about 257 million years old. And this was still targeting large structures, but it was a new play. So still using 2D seismic, slightly improved seismic quality in the 1980s to the 1990s, but it's a new play in an old place. The third phase is the mopping up phase, and there's actually two components to the third phase. The first occurred onshore, and it was targeting smaller structures in the Dongara sandstone, the old play in the old place. Remember, not much oil is found in an old play in an old place, and that's what happened here. But when you say not much oil, the discoveries of Hovia, Jingamaya, Osiris, Apium were all very profitable to those companies involved. It didn't take much oil in that period when oil was really high to make a good turnover for the company there. And this was helped on the onshore area by the acquisition of 3D seismic over the area. So they were able to target these smaller, more subtle structures. The second part to the third phase occurred in Cliff Head, in the offshore area. A lot of work had gone on in the previous years and decades prior to that, and then when Cliff Head was drilled and discovered oil in the Irwin River coal measures, a much older play to the Dongara play, that's around about 275 million years old. This opened up a new play in a new area, in the offshore area, and that was followed up by discoveries at Dunsborough and Franklin and also Perseverance. Phase 4 is the current phase, started in 2014, goes to now, and it's a phase of large gas fields being discovered in the deeper play of the Kingia Formation. Now, this is using a combination of high resolution 2D and 3D seismic. So we've gone from the low resolution, only able to image the larger structures back in the 1960s, to now this modern data set able to image deep, what were hard to image plays in the past. This is a new play in an old place. It's around that same area as the Dongara discoveries. And there are still a number of sizable discoveries yet to be drilled. And I finished this slide off yesterday, and I said, in the case of Lockyer Deep currently being drilled, and I've just discovered this morning, much to the joy, I hope, of MRL and Norwest, that Lockyer Deep appears to be an unmitigated success. Congratulations to both of those companies on taking that risk. So, what does this all mean? The northern Perth Basin has a history of new hydrocarbon-bearing plays being discovered and then being drilled out by the companies involved until the play becomes mature. These play types have increased in complexity over time, from simple structural highs in phase 1 to different sands but in similar structural settings in phase 2, and then in phase 3 to smaller, more subtle opportunities in proven plays, plus stepping out into new places with new plays that may have future potential in terms of the offshore Cliff Head style discoveries. And then in phase 4, unlocked new deep plays that were unable to be imaged in the earlier phases 1, 2 and partially 3. So to see what the future holds, let's delve into the details of this Kingia play and see what it entails. So, Senecio 3, a lucky well. I do believe Senecio 3 was a lucky well, but my definition of luck, I think, is going to be very different to other people's. Senecio 3 drilled in 2004 to test a tight gas discovery that was previously found in the Dongara sandstone, and then deepened to the Kingia Formation when AWE found they still had money in their drilling budget. The well had excellent shows over a thick interval of the Kingia Formation. And I believe this was a classic case of smart luck. And the definition of luck I use is a sportsman's definition of luck. Luck is the intersection of preparation and opportunity. And this is what happened. The preparation was undertaken previously by companies including Arc Energy, and Arc Energy was taken over by AWE in 2008. And a number of wells have been drilled by Arc Energy, including Cory Bass and Drachia 1, that in some cases were unsuccessful, in other cases not quite commercial. But a lot of those learnings were taken by Arc Energy, and a number of key staff were retained by AWE when they took over Arc Energy, and so that knowledge was passed on. That was the preparation, and the opportunity came through reduced drilling costs, and they took that opportunity. And hats off to AWE, because they had the good management to recognise the opportunity and take the chance, and it's paid off for them. So the current play is the Kingia Formation. What is it? The Kingia Formation is the name of a near-shore sand, so deposited just off the beach in the ocean there about 275 million years ago. And the excitement about this is that even at depths around 5 kilometres, these sands retain significant porosity, and it's due to a clay coating around the grains that has stopped them from being silicified. Other sands in the northern Perth Basin, including the Dongara and the Wodgina sands, generally tend to lose their porosity at depths below 2,700 metres. But the challenge with the Kingia play is to find where the clay coatings are in the depositional environment, because it's not ubiquitous across the whole of the Kingia Formation. So what is this anomalous porosity that's making all of these exploration companies so exciting? What it is porosity is preserved in the Kingia Formation by a specific type of clay, an iron-rich clay, which coats the quartz grains and inhibits late-stage quartz overgrowth. And here's an example of one of those grains just down here. And this stops the effect that has destroyed the porosity in the Dongara sandstone at 2,700 metres. There have been a number of studies undertaken on this, and all of these propose models that involve shallow marine to estuarine deposition adjacent to fluvial input. And just here is one of those studies there, and it shows high concentrations of these iron-rich clays in the estuary area, and then out around the beach area, a lower concentration, but still a significant concentration. So to put this into easy to understand language, we expect to see these clay-coated grains, this porosity preservation mechanism in marine sands close to estuaries, river mouths and delta fronts. So these areas would have the anomalous porosity preservation, whereas other areas where it's just a straight beach with no river systems coming through nearby are unlikely to have this mechanism and be subject to this porosity degradation that occurs around 2,700 metres. So what are the future opportunities for the Kingia play? There are companies with acreage in the North Perth Basin that have identified a large number of opportunities along the Waitsia West Erregulla trend. These are all at depths greater than 3,000 metres. So I think within that portfolio of prospects, we're likely to see some really good additional discoveries coming through. And I can now cross Lockyer Deep off that list of potentials and put it into an actual. In the offshore area, 2 recent wells drilled by Murphy Oil drilled through the Kingia Formation, and they found these clay coatings, but they weren't effective. It wasn't quite close enough to a river input. So it wasn't quite the right depositional environment in 2 points in the offshore area. But there may be other areas offshore where this mechanism may well work. So this leaves us with 2 questions. How deep does the porosity preservation go, and where else can we find it? Right now we don't know the absolute depth that this mechanism goes. We know it goes down to at least 5,500 metres from some of the West Erregulla wells. It may go down to 6,000 metres. It may even go down as far as 7,500 metres. That opens up a lot of acreage within the northern Perth Basin. And the other thing is, where else can we find it? We know in a couple of parts of the offshore, not quite there, but there may be some new places we can extend this play out of from this current area around Waitsia West Erregulla, possibly into the area offshore and possibly to the area south of where Waitsia and West Erregulla is. So there is a lot of potential for not just the identified discoveries we have at present, but also future discoveries in areas we haven't recognised yet. So not just the Kingia, but let's look past phase 4. What possibly could we be looking at in phases 5, 6 and 7 in the petroleum history of the northern Perth Basin? There's an area to the east of the basin along what's called the Urella-Darling Fault System, and there the Dongara sandstone becomes shallow again at depths less than 2,700 metres where it can have porosity. This would be taking the old play around the Dongara-Hovia area and bringing it into a new place. Great potential exists in there. There's the Jurassic gas. I haven't spoken much about the Jurassic gas today. My apologies to Strike Energy. I think I've got some there. But this is a de-risk play. There have been discoveries in Gingin, Red Gully, Whalering, Warrow, Ocean Hill. The play has essentially been de-risked because we know gas can exist there, but it hasn't been systematically explored yet. And so this is a newish play in an old place. Great opportunity again. And then there's the more conceptual plays. There's a turbidite plays. Turbidites are generally mass wasting events on the ocean shelf where the sediment then drops off the ocean shelf and goes into the ocean deeps. Now, between the early and late Permian, about 265 million years ago, there was a significant mass erosion event in the northern Perth Basin. And the question is, where did this sediment go? It didn't just disappear, it had to go into the basin deeps. And there has been some groundwork laid, the initial stages of preparation in wells such as Mount Adams 1, Munganuka 1, that have recorded in their well completion reports the presence of distal turbidites. So these are penetrations that are just on the edge, possibly, of these turbidite systems. Could this be the thin end of the wedge for unlocking this play in the future? And potential areas for this play include the offshore and the southern part of the northern Perth Basin, a new play in a new place. So how can we maximise the preparation component? Because the opportunity comes regardless of whether we're prepared for the opportunity or not. But the key is preparing for the opportunity. One of the things we need to do as geoscientists and also exploration companies is embrace the fact that exploration is inherently risky. Right? People talk about chance of success, but let's turn it around and look at chance of failure. The average Perth Basin well has a chance of failure between 70 and 80%. And even a good well, a low-risk exploration well, has about a 60% chance of failure. At a rough cost of $12 million for an onshore well, this can prove very expensive. But the rewards are there. To find a modest, Hovia-style, roughly 10 million barrel discovery, that can generate a return to the company of well in excess of $200 million. Right? There is a reason that banks don't drill wells. There is risk in there. Right? But there is great reward for those companies that persevere and approach exploration in a smart way. And you have to learn from both your failures and successes. Waitsia wasn't just achieved by a lucky well. Waitsia was achieved by leveraging on the lessons from a number of dry holes and sub-commercial discoveries, such as Cory Bass and Drachia, and integrating this data over a number of years. So a few unsuccessful wells don't invalidate a new play. In fact, the real failure here would be to not integrate this data and modify your models to then reflect the reality. The other key to maximising preparation is to get your hands dirty in the data. This is hard work. There is no two ways about it. It was mentioned before by Stuart about Geoscience Australia and West Australian Mines Department having a lot of data. They do have a lot of data, dating back well into the 60s. Search through these old reports from WAPIT, the old well completion reports, integrate that data. There will be some really useful threads of information in there that you can apply to your models and improve those. You also need to avoid only looking at the shiniest new data that comes through. So just looking at new 3D data sets. There is a wealth of other data that will help your interpretation on these data sets. And most importantly to my mind is that don't forget that the geoscientists of old, back in the WAPIT days of the 1960s and 70s, and then the Premier Oil and Sagasco days of the 80s and 90s, they weren't dumb. They just didn't have access to all the data and data handling tools we have today. And a common theme on this slide, at least, is make sure you integrate the old data into the new. That's how you're going to maximise your preparation when the opportunity comes. So, to conclude, Professor Park Dickey's 1958 quote, I believe, is still relevant 63 years later. And more importantly, we have to make sure we don't run out of ideas. The current Kingia play is still emerging. In those creaming curves, it is still in the emergent phase, and I believe there are some very large discoveries to be made over the next 5 or so years, and I'm really looking forward to it. There are a number of new plays in new places that have the potential to drive phases 5, 6 and 7 in the Perth Basin. And I look forward to seeing the North Perth Basin continue to provide discoveries to those companies that are willing to put in the preparation that's needed to unlock these future hydrocarbon reserves in the Perth Basin. Thank you all.